the event.
Okay. Thank you. A warm welcome to each one of you for this exclusive session on national logistics policy. The session is organized under the aegis of E-commerce Retail Logistics and Warehouse Expert Committee of the Chamber, headed by Mr. Krishnakumar, founder and MD Simbus Technologies, co-chaired by Mr. D.S. Mony, SCM Southeast Asia Dell, and another co-chair, Mr. Srinivasa Venkatappa, co-founder, Homepecked e-marketing services. On behalf of the Chamber, we are extremely beholden to the distinguished speakers who have accepted our invitation to address at this session. Mr. Rishabh Rastogi, Supply Chain and Logistics Experts, Maybach Consulting. Welcome you, sir. Mr. Suresh Ramani, Chief Operating Officer, TVS Supply Chain Solutions. Mr. Saikat Sarkar, Head Logistics, Bueller Group. Welcome you all once again for this session. The BCIC also acknowledged the support of our member companies who are the annual sponsors, Messrs. Bueller, Continental, Fundamax, IAMPL, MTR, SDMIMD, Solar Group, TVS Motor, Vishwas Group, and Wipro for their support in the activities of the Chamber. Now I would like to hand over the stage to Mr. Krishnakumar to take it over from here. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Rupa. Rupa, may I request you to, there are a lot of people who are marked as presenters. So what's happening is I hear a lot of background noise. Can you please make only the 5 of us as presenters?
We are doing it, sir.
Okay, great. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Krishnakumar, KK. I head the expert committee on supply chain logistics and e-commerce as part of the BCIC organization, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this event. Just to kind of give a quick mandate, what is the mandate of this expert committee? Basically, it's one of the critical objectives what we have as part of our setup is to disseminate information on the latest developments in supply chain logistics and also to discuss some of the critical policy initiatives and basically bring to the fore how this can impact your organizations and what kind of steps you need to take to make sure that you are able to leverage some of these policy changes. So that's what broadly the mandate is. And as part of that, this is the second of the events what we have held. About a couple of months back, we had a very interesting event by McKinsey on the best practices in supply chain. So in continuation of that, we thought that we should bring in experts to discuss some of the very critical aspects which is going to impact us in the coming years. So before I actually jump into the actual purpose of the topic, I just wanted to share a very interesting insight how logistics and especially supply chain has evolved in the last 30 years since I started my career. So those days it was called logistics, and I started my career with Madura Courts. I'm sure many of you know Madura Courts as an organization, and I had a very interesting boss, Mr. Tirumalai there, and he asked me a simple question, KK, do you know what is logistics? So I started giving him a very interesting academic discourse on what is logistics and all. He stopped me and said, no. When you come to the real world, logistics is nothing but a very logical explanation of non-delivery. So he said most often than not, you're going to fail in delivery. You will not get goods on time. So make sure that you have a very creative excuse to explain to the management why something has not happened on time. So from a situation like that, where as logistics practitioners, we used to struggle on visibility, we used to struggle on even simple things like getting to know where the consignment is. Today, it has evolved phenomenally. Today, we are talking about AI, ML, and whatnot, right? So it has really come a long way. And as someone said, the COVID actually brought logistics and supply chain from the back room into the boardroom. Today, there is no board meeting which doesn't address what are the critical challenges supply chain presents to the organization. So not just about a competitive differentiation, but companies have been disrupted most often adversely with the kind of challenges which supply chains have gone through in the last 2-3 years. So that's what the background is. Now let's come to what is this national logistics policy and why we believe in BCIC that it's a very important policy which can affect many of our member companies in a very positive way. As you all know, today there is a very big discussion around logistics, and especially when it comes to the kind of challenges which logistics practitioners face, India is one of the countries which has traditionally been besieged with a phenomenal amount of disadvantages. And today there is a kind of a discussion that our logistics cost is around 14% of GDP. Of course, there is a school of thought which says that the methodology which has been used to compute this is not correct. But all said and done, one has to agree that logistics cost is something which is very, very disproportionately high. And how does it affect businesses? Obviously, it comes to competitiveness. We are seriously affected. We can't be competitive in terms of pricing when we compete with companies and countries on a global level. Second thing, when it comes to service, there is also a fair amount of friction and disadvantage which has to be borne by the companies when it comes to turnaround, delivery times, etc. So given all this, it is very pertinent to note that our Prime Minister himself, Honorable Prime Minister himself, has taken it upon himself to bring about a transformation in this sector. So the National Logistics Policy, which has been announced by none other than the Prime Minister, fundamentally tries to address some of the structural challenges and the deficiencies which our country is going through, right? And one of the critical things is about bringing down the logistics cost. That's one. Also to improve the distribution and service, and more importantly, make exports very competitive in the current scheme of things, right? So there is a very interesting study which says that even a 10 to 15% reduction in the logistics cost, which is not unfeasible. I mean, definitely this is a very feasible method to bring down the cost. So even such a 10 to 15% reduction can actually lead to an 8 to 9% increase in our exports. And that is pretty significant, right? We are looking at exports as being one of the prime drivers of the GDP growth in the coming years. So that's something, and you can also see around yourself, and there is a very quiet revolution happening. So there is this Gati Shakti initiative, which is basically to improve the road transportation. There is also Sagarmala, which is to string together a very nice multimodal kind of a logistics network, which companies can leverage upon. So there is a fair amount of action happening around, and to unravel what is actually happening and what is going to happen as far as the national logistics policy is concerned, it is my pleasure to introduce the panel which is going to discuss. To start with, we are first going to have a presentation by Rishabh Rastogi. Mr. Rishabh Rastogi is a seasoned supply chain professional, comes with about 10 years of experience. He's a BTech from IIT Dhanbad and an MBA from IIM Lucknow. And he has worked in supply chain. Currently, he is a project manager and a senior consultant in Meback Logistics, a very, very well-known logistics company which has phenomenal expertise when it comes to supply chain and logistics. So he has done a very thorough analysis of the national logistics policy, and he's going to first of all present to us what is this policy all about, what are the critical aspects of the policy. Number two, he's going to also talk about what is the potential impact it can have on companies and how companies can take advantage of the beneficial aspects of the policy. So that's the key speaker who's going to be there. I'm also pleased to introduce two other gentlemen, very seasoned professionals, who also will join the panel discussion and talk about the practical aspects of the national logistics policy, and also talk about the current challenges what they undergo as supply chain practitioners. So Mr. Suresh Ramani, he's going to join us today. He's the COO and the country head of TVS Supply Chain Solutions, a very prominent supply chain solutions company in India. He comes from a background of BTech in IIT Madras and MBA from IIM Bangalore, and more than 30 years of experience across various groups, predominantly companies like Unilever, Godrej Group, Tata's, and the TVS Group. So I'm really looking forward to his rich expertise, because in his position, I'm sure he would have interacted a lot with companies and across diverse sectors, across various industries. So Suresh, I'm really looking forward to some critical insights, because you're out there in the front line interacting with the chief supply chain officers, getting to know what kind of disadvantages and the challenges which the supply chain practitioners face. So we would like to discuss that as part of the panel discussion. And also I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Saikat Sarkar. So he heads the logistics for Bueller Group, and Saikat in his position is responsible for ensuring that all the export consignments are all on time, goes on destination on time. And we did talk about some of the challenges which companies like Bueller faces, and a company which is in the capital goods sector. So looking forward to this discussion. So with that, I'm also pleased to introduce and welcome Mr. Devarajan. I see Mr. Ravindran there, President of BCIC, Mr. Devarajan, Senior VP. Thank you, sir, for joining. And Mr. Srinivasa Venkatappa, who is the mentor coordinator for the expert committee on supply chain. Really pleased to see familiar faces and looking forward to your contribution during this discussion. So with that, Rishabh, may I request you to please start your presentation, and we are ready. Over to you.
Sure, Krishna. So I'll structure it like this, Krishna. I'll just quickly brief about the logistics policy and what are the key provisions about it, and then I'll leave the panel open for Saikat and Suresh to discuss it. Then again, I'll come back with summarizing what is the present issues which the country is facing and what are the possible solutions which logistics policy brings up, along with what companies themselves should try to get a competitive advantage in logistics sector. Okay.
Great.
Yeah, let me share my screen. Please tell me when it's visible.
Yeah, we can see the screen. Yes.
Sure. I'll quickly start with the introduction of MEBA Consulting, and then we'll go to the logistics policy. So MEBA Consulting is more than 50 years old organization present across the world. We have 26 offices in 22 countries with more than 450 people and one of the top 50% global supply chain leading consulting firms. What we work upon major areas is supply chain transformation, engineering implementation, that is warehousing implementation and design, digital supply chain, how we digitize the end-to-end supply chain, operational excellence and sustainability. The whole objective of the organization is to create a competitive advantage through supply chain. So that's what we do end-to-end, right from plan to implement. This is the key areas, and the industries we work across is all like from automotive, chemical, manufacturing, retail, pharma, FMCG. So this is what we do. Now, quickly, I'll move to logistics policy. So as I think Krishna already mentioned, the present logistics cost is around 14%. And what the policy envisages it to bring it down to around 8% of the GDP, which is in line with the best countries of the world, like the developed world, which is around 8% of the GDP. So the policy presents a lot of opportunities in logistics sector, as what we say is the present logistics spend is around 200 billion for India, which is around 14% of the GDP. And the sector envisages to grow at a CAGR of 5% over the next 5 years. Therefore, this seems to double in the next 5 years. So there is a huge amount of potential in the logistics industry. And what, as Suresh, I think Krishna already mentioned, the MSME sector, which is there around, I think, 1/3 of the GDP, which is growing at a rate of 18.5%. And that's where the logistics policy directly affects because it promotes export. Because a 10% service improvement in logistics would have an improvement of 7 to 8% of exports. So this is where the vision of Prime Minister is. And presently, as we see, being a top 5 economy of the world, but we are ranked 44th in Global Logistics Performance Index. So that's the vision to bring it down to top 10 and achieve at 8% of the GDP. Certain challenges which the policy envisages, I'll quickly brief is, one is the shipment delivery lead times, which is related to custom delays and timelines and clearances, port turnaround, road infrastructure, and then within the cities, no entry issues. So these are all practical constraints which are there. India is not as competitive as compared to China when it comes to international shipping lanes. That's also a major concern. The shipment cost, the ocean cost is a big concern for us. And then finally, the infrastructure and competence, the seamless multimodal connectivity, road and port infrastructure. So these are the key challenges which India's logistics sector faces. And NLP aims to solve them through first is reduction of cost, make India a global leader, and then set up a digital ecosystem which can enable the reduction of logistics cost as well as improvement of service. So this is what the NLP envisages. I'll quickly now move to the key components of NLP. The NLP has 3 major components. One, which focuses on comprehensive logistics action plan. Second is the unified logistics interface platform. And third is the dashboard for ease of logistics. I'll brief what are the 3 different components and how they envisage to create an ecosystem where the overall logistics performance index improves of the country. First is under the comprehensive logistics action plan. So this is the first time where the country has envisaged for a end-to-end logistics improvement setup. Earlier, it was completely defragmented. As you see, the shipping ministry will be working differently along with rail ministry, along with road ministry. So these are all different setup. Now they have envisaged to set up a coherent planning. So that is why they have set up a comprehensive logistics action plan. Now what they envisage is to set up an integrated digital logistics where the movement of goods as well as the documentation can be digitized. There are certain examples which the government has already done. For example, the recently when I was doing a certificate of origin, which used to be manual earlier, has now moved on online basis. So we need not go to for signing a certificate of origin for exports, for example. Then the second focus is standardization of physical assets. Now, when we standardize physical assets, this ensures scale. So this is the second focus area. Then it is human resource development for logistics. Logistics as a separate study was never been thought of. There are few universities who have started MBA in logistics and supply chain management, and there now after this policy, there is a special focus on this. State engagement. So what it does is a leads is a state ranking system where they would rank states on the logistics performance and create a competitive advantage within the states. So that the competition is going to lead to more investments in logistics and infrastructure. It envisages to set up logistics park and standardized warehouse operations. Then there is a sectoral plan defined under Gati Shakti to set up a seamless multimodal logistics, which includes rail, ports, as well as roads. So this is the common policy part. Then they have set up an interface platform to enable this policy, which ensures like a integrated system where all the ministries, for example, all the 7 ministries which I gave example of road, rail, etc., would be coordinating themselves to enable this policy. So that is what the architecture looks like. There's an integration layer which integrates all the ministries. There's a governance layer which decides how the ministries would function to set up this policy, and then the presentation layer which ensures the action on this policy. The third thing which they have set up is to set up a dashboard for ease of logistics, which helps us to reduce the information cost. Now, what this dashboard they are planning to do is, especially with related to exports and import, there is a lot of information asymmetry with respect to the shipping line cost. For example, what is the ocean cost today? If I want to ask somebody, it would be very difficult to get us the exact and the most competitive prices because there is no real-time tracking. What they want to set up is a network where a common platform where both the service provider, that is the logistics service provider, as well as the companies can impanel. The companies create the requirement and logistics service provider now quote. So these logistics service provider includes shipping lines, freight forwarders, the CHA agents, everyone. So this creates a ground where the price discovery can happen, as well as this improves, this gives the visibility of the load which actually is there, and therefore better planning of shipments, etc., can also be done. So these are the 3 key components of logistics policy. Now I would like to make the forum open to Saikat and Suresh, where they can discuss what are the key issues which the country is initially facing these days. And then I'll just quickly summarize those issues with how this policy envisages to address in a practical scenario when we do an end-to-end logistics setup.
Yeah, thanks, Rishabh. Before we get Suresh and Saikat, just a small announcement. Those of you who want to ask any specific questions related to the policy, kindly send it through the chat. We already have a list of questions which have been shared before, and I thank all the participants who have sent those questions. But if you think that there are some questions which you want to ask, please send it through the chat and I'll pick them up and ask them if we have the time at the end of this. So over to you, Suresh. Looking forward to hear from you 2 things. One, as Rishabh mentioned, what are the current challenges which companies in India face? Second, and would really appreciate if you can kind of throw some light on, in terms of the logistics metrics, how do we benchmark with respect to the global companies and global logistics service providers? Because I'm sure as part of your company strategy, you would have benchmarked how you operate against the global standards. So would like to hear from you on these 2 aspects, basically.
Thanks, KK. Just a quick introduction. My name is Suresh Ramani. I handle operations in TS Supply Chain Solutions. Specifically, I operate in the auto engineering and industrials area of the business. We are present across India, and I have a workforce of about 15,000 on roll and about 20 to 23,000, including off-roll employees. We're present in about 150 to 160 locations where we manage services and deliver services to a range of customers. Unfortunately, Bueller is not a customer of ours. So hopefully we should see how to make them a customer after this. Look, I think most logistics companies or most companies who are in the 3PL space, they would have fairly similar challenges that they would face. One from a customer perspective and second from an internal operations perspective, right? From a customer perspective, the pressure always is how do you bring the cost down? How do you do something faster? And cost cannot come down automatically because if you run a fragmented system, it's very difficult to bring down cost. And you can't do things fast if the truck takes 8 days to travel from place A to place B. So those are very straightforward challenges that are posed to us from a customer standpoint. But what's of more interest really for us, because we are in the job as a 3PL or a logistics or a solution service provider, is to deliver value to the customer. And so I pick up three areas, which are three broad areas. One is infra, one is people, and one is tech. In infra, there are some pieces of infra which we control, or at least partially control, some pieces of infra that we don't control. Things like road infrastructure, ability to do various kinds of trucking. For example, there was an experiment to do something around road rail, which is run a convoy of containers on a prime mover, or allow a prime mover to run with multiple containers. These kind of flexibilities which we find in global organizations, even our own companies in the US, we don't have here. So there are a set of such constraints, which are external constraints, which are related to how you can get trucks that are extra long, more load handling, flexibility to kind of dock on and dock off trucks, better roads for transportation. A lot of work has been done right now using, thanks both to GST and to FASTag. A lot of the transit times have come down dramatically. I must say that right now, transit times have come down at least 30 to 40% in lots of cases. So the transit time problem is kind of solved, but still the capacity problem, the documentation problem, the fact that a lot of paperwork still needs to be carried back and forth, I think those are external challenges. Internally, from an infra point of view, warehousing is still a maturing field in India. There is now an increased focus on improving warehousing quality. Obviously, better warehousing quality means better level of services, better ability to handle a wider range of merchandise in the same warehouse, and ability to look at mechanized handling of goods. That's one area which is a challenge for us. It's a challenge because there's a shortage of quality warehouse space. The cost structures are not very efficient. So a rent, what you're used to paying 15 rupees a square feet, suddenly now it's 25 rupees a square feet. And these are a very significant increase in cost for a customer. It becomes a very tough job for us to be able to explain. The other thing is around standardized packaging. Packaging is very non-standard, varies from customer to customer. Our ability to create interoperability on assets comes down. And you must understand that one of the growth engines for India will be the SME sector. Delhi obviously has the resources to be able to extract what they want, but the SME sector depends a lot on shared infrastructure, the ability to pull in resources as and when needed. And that's possible only when you're able to create those kind of fungible resources, both on the infra side and also on the equipment and the storage side. So that's from an infra point of view. From a people point of view, I think you already mentioned logistics is not considered an industry, but it employs a lot of people. So I think there is a need for a standard around that. Just a small example, NAPS is a program that applies to manufacturing companies. I don't have a use case where I can use NAPS. I'm not making a case for NAPS, but I'm just saying that the thought process that an apprentice program is not applicable to a logistics company suggests that vision has to come in. I think some work is happening there. I also think the new labor code will help ease out a lot of the challenges we find in getting skilled people because of the multiple labor laws, multiple rates and rules that apply. So I think some amount of standardization is needed there, and also a standardization of skill benchmarking. The third area is around tech. Tech is where a lot of challenges are for us today. There is a huge desire and appetite to consume tech, but there are the integration standards are a problem. The means to integrate are an issue. And if you run across 2-3 hops of the product, how do I make sure that I know where the product is? So these are some of the challenges that we face today. And I'm just kind of staying at this level because individual problems are more specific. But broadly, if you look at solution service providers, they have these as the big challenges. From a cost benchmarking point of view, I do believe that there is a need to reduce the cost of total cost of operation and logistics. Somebody speaking. It is estimated at 14%. There's a lot of data. I think if people go through NLP, there's enormous amount of benchmarking data that's available and presented there. We rank a lowly 40th or so. I wouldn't be so worried about the ranking. I think the ranking need not be a goal for us, but what certainly has to be a goal for us is to see how we can drive through policy and through infrastructure and through institution a downward trend in the total cost, which can happen if you focus on these three areas. I don't think in the foreseeable future we will get to an 8% kind of a number. But if you're able to chop off 200 basis points, and someone else mentioned that every basis point chop increases our competitiveness. A 200 basis point chop is something that is, I think, achievable. I don't think we are a cheap logistics. We are a cheap logistics area. We are not necessarily a low-cost logistics area. So I think there is some amount of education where we need to educate ourselves and also work with customers to build those constructs of what is low cost and what is low unit transaction cost. So a policy framework around these, which looks at logistics as an industry, obviously something that will change the way we look at total cost of operations. That's what I just want to stop.
Yeah, thanks, Suresh. Well articulated, and a lot of the points what you raised, I'm sure people here kind of recognize. And the point you made about cost is very important because we always look at L1, but companies struggle to actually compute the total cost of ownership. So there are so many hidden costs. They struggle to understand that. They just look at what is there on the quotation and decide that, okay, here is the lowest cost LSP and I'll go with them. Anyway, that's a discussion for another day. So Saikat, I would like to invite you to share as a supply chain professional, especially on exports, and exports being an important area. Share with us the kind of pain which exporters go through and how it has affected your business. And so that's something which we want to hear, because subsequently we would like to take up and see how NLP addresses that and how we can take leverage of these beneficial aspects of the NLP. And I would also request you to give a quick introduction to the Buehler Group for the benefit of those who may not be very familiar with your group.
Yeah, sure, KK. Thanks, everybody, and good afternoon to all. I think Suresh had set the right stage for the discussion. It gives us a lot of confidence to talk about our pain points. But initially I thought I shouldn't be using this forum to just talk about the pain point, but also how to we approach the solution. But yeah, before we get to that, a little bit about Buehler. Buehler is a global leader in agro automation. We call ourselves a technology company, but the focus is definitely on the agro sector and all the various extracts of the grains and wheat and every area of agro diversity, which where our machines are deployed globally. So Buehler India has been in the market for over more than 25 years, and in the last half a decade, it has gained significant prominence as one of the center of excellence and the production hubs for the supplies into the southern hemisphere, particularly into Africa, into Latin America, and such similar markets. I look after the complete operations for the outbound, which is the customer-centric operation, and which includes almost 90% of exports from our side. But having said that, I was just taking a point from what Suresh was saying, that the domestic warehousing, which gets related to our export performance, is also a very critical area which has significantly got hiked in the last 1 or 2 years in terms of the per square feet cost around this geography. So I will possibly come back to that point, but let me just first highlight how our expectations as an manufacturing export organization supporting our honorable Prime Minister's Make in India initiative as a global manufacturing hub for our organization. How the global organization looks at India as the next player in the China Plus One strategy, which is a very common segment for many organizations today, considering the geopolitical uncertainties that are prevailing. So we have a big task on hand, right? If I may share some figures, our total logistics spend, particularly from South of Asia, was almost close to around last year was around 3.8 billion euros. So with that kind of a spend, and with the strategic responsibility which is coming on to us in terms of supporting the entire delivery module from India and supported by Vietnam, which is also controlled from India, we have a big task on hand for the export performances. Now, of course, the expansion of our production facility, the expansion of multiple supplier base, all that is in progress with our vision 23 to 25 focus. But at the same time, there are a couple of areas where we are constantly keeping in mind that we have to overcome these challenges in terms of the logistics part within the country. Right. In most of my sessions, which I share with my colleagues in the other geographies, it's at time it's a little difficult to explain that what is an ICD concept and why from the ICD we have delays in movement from to the port. Why does a port custom clearance follow a different pattern in one port of South India versus one port of West India? So there are multiple areas which come across like this, but let me just share some of the points individually where from the export perspective, we have put some expectation in the national logistics policy to support us into achieving our goals, which we call in this organization we call it a 2025 goals. We want to achieve a certain degree of export volume. So one of them is basically the uniformity of the port terminal handling charges. So today we sort of call ourselves partly married to ICD Bangalore and Chennai port because we have created our cost structure around those outbound locations, those outbound points. However, considering that we are into a significant focus of diversity with our suppliers in the western part of the country, somehow our cost on Nhava Sheva also has to be brought in parity. So this is where we find that maybe uniformity in the port THC should help us to achieve some of our port consolidation targets, wherein we can create a similar model. Like, to give you an example, we have in Rotterdam. So for entire EU suppliers, all the materials which are getting shipped from the multiple production locations are getting consolidated in Rotterdam at a uniform tariff which they are implementing. So something in India, if we have to be flexible between Chennai, Krishnapatnam, Nhava Sheva, or maybe Hazira, we should be able to do that, right? Consequently, what is happening is that our total landed cost for any item which is moved from India is also getting impacted with this difference in prices and standardization of the trucking costs from either a builder factory or the supplier location to the particular port. So that is one area. If we have a kind of a standardized distance or kilometer wise rate tariff which can be implemented, that should be great help. I mentioned about ICD because being in Bangalore, we are in a location where we depend on ICD, both the ICDs of Bangalore and ICD of Hosur for our operation. Somehow, in spite of our earlier efforts to talk with the ICD operators to give us a standard dispatch KPI, that if we hand over the container on this particular day, what would be the lead time for movement from ICD to the port. So in fact, we have tried many times to do a backward integration from the vessel cutoff at the port backwards to the ICD to see if that works. But for some reason or the other, there are multiple dependencies of the ICD also on Concor or the truck availability or the customs permission. So all this together somehow have not been able to standardize this KPI timeline from ICD to the port. The other important area which I would like to highlight is that we have significant amount of road movement which happens between India and Bangladesh, India and Bhutan. So while Bhutan, I can say it is not that prominent in terms of the service issues, but Bangladesh, yes. We have had almost close to, in last year, we did about $350,000 of freight movement of export into Bangladesh. And there is only one corridor which currently feeds the India-Bangladesh movement as a bilateral channel, which is surprising. And I had the chance to actually travel by road from Calcutta to the Benapole border and then physically cross the border and then move from there to see the condition. So this was a really sad state of affairs. I mean, with India and Bangladesh being very strong trade partners, with our Prime Minister visiting there in early 2022 to to initiate the power distribution agreement between the Rupur nuclear power plant and India, and all the major EPC organizations supporting such projects. Somehow that corridor is not cleared yet, and we had also raised several concerns through the Indian High Commission in Bangladesh, through the Ministry of Foreign Trade, to give us some kind of a visibility. In fact, we came up telling them that you can create multiple channels, like one for smaller vehicles, one for heavy project vehicles, but somehow it's not like in a wishful thinking like the US-Mexico border, where you've got multiple corridors open to travel. It is just one singular corridor, which one side is controlled by the CWC and the other side by the Benapole Land Port Authority. So that's not a very encouraging state whenever we talk about a bilateral trade, and particularly a destination country for a business like ours, where we see multiple opportunities coming up there. And that brings us to the dependency on moving it to Chennai and taking it to Chittagong, clearing it in Chittagong, bringing it, in spite of us having sharing a land border between the two countries. The other area is on blockchain, where there are singular initiatives being taken by multiple shipping lines to initiate this process. But we, as project executioners and exporters, we find that in many cases, when we are dealing with projects and customers in Africa, several countries of Africa, there are multiple banks which are not on the blockchain. So even in spite of having all the right intentions to participate in the blockchain, either we are missing out on having our target carriers. Of course, some of the carriers who are registered on some of the blockchain channels are may not be serving Africa for that matter. So we have to look into alternatives. So getting more international banks and more In fact, if you ask me, all the liners who are operating from India should be encouraged to participate on the blockchain. So at least 80% of that the chain can be fulfilled with the partner, and the bank, of course, that follows a different platform of participation that can be looked into. And yeah, finally, in terms of imports when they are coming to our country, the standard port and ICD free days that can be because we talk about, we negotiate on the liner free days, with the shipping line or the forwarder, but the standard port and ICD free days, in order to boost the import which feeds into the export in a particular manner, that can be encouraged through the national logistics policy. So basically, these are the few points which I feel are common pain points, apart from the huge jump in freight which has affected us during the COVID years, which somehow we have come out and we are gradually getting back on our feet. We have bled very badly in 2 years. Almost every export organization has done that. I think these are some of the points which are collectively impacting most of our fellow exporters in this space or other spaces, and I'm sure some approach in this regard should be very helpful for us.
Hey, thanks, Saikat. Well articulated. So if I were to kind of summarize what you said, I think the most important point which came out of your presentation was variability. Right.
Yes.
And one thing which I'm sure all the practitioners will agree is that while the delays may not kill the supply chain, variability will surely kill the supply chain. And I have been in similar circumstances where you don't know when this consignment is going to arrive, because it all depends on the whims and fancies of a customs official and his mood, right? If he decides to put this consignment under inspection, you had it, right? And to draw a parallel, I want to kind of give an example of our airports. I mean, our airports are all getting very swanky. You visit any of the metro airports, phenomenally swanky, but what is the kind of experience we run into with the CISF, which handles the security, right? They become the bottleneck in the whole process. So like that, you talked about that. You also talked about lack of standardization in the financial flows. I think that's a very important point, because while physically the goods may move fast, but if the documents and the monies don't reach in time, then the synchronization of the supply chain will not happen. And so Rishabh, I think you got some excellent pointers in terms of challenges. I also want you to touch upon, if you're not thought of that, is that countries like China, especially China, has recognized that what is going to drive their export flow is a very nice seamless movement of goods across borders. I mean, the kind of issues what Saikat presented. And I believe the Belt and Loop Initiative, or the BRI, though unpopular as it may sound, was actually an attempt to do that, right? Now, what I want to know is India has something similar? I know we may not have the kind of economic heft and the muscle to create a global infra and a pipeline and a supply chain on that scale, but at least aligning with the friendly countries. I know there was talk about US working with India to create something like that. So are all part of the NLP? So we are now eagerly looking forward to your presentation on how some of the specific issues, what has been highlighted, is going to be addressed here in this. And also one more point, there's a very interesting question which has come up from Mr. Anantram. He's the head of commercial and logistics, and I just saw him join the conversation. So what he says is that the biggest challenge in India is we don't have enough ocean liners, right? So a lot of our export today goes through the feeders, either via Colombo or through Singapore, right? And our competitiveness in terms of lead times and cost is affected because of that. So does the NLP address this particular issue in making sure that India is an attractive destination for the ocean liners to have a direct routing and a direct channel instead of going through Sri Lanka or through Singapore? Over to you, Rishabh.
Yeah, sure, Krishna. So I'll try to cover up most of the problems, I think, which Saikat raised and even Suresh said, both in terms of domestic as well as export and import. And then probably there were some questions which you raised with regard to the Belt and Road Initiative. Does India has a parallel to that, and the liner part? So that I'll answer later on. So I'll just quickly explain how I wanted to take it as a practical example, how the NLP unlocks various problems we are facing. So if I just try to set up an end-to-end network where we are importing via port, then to an ICD, then to a plant, where we manufacture, and then this is the inbound part, and then there is an outbound part from plant to warehouse, and then to a multi-channel, I would say an omni-channel customer service. So this is if I want to set up and envisage a very smooth operations, what are the key issues which we face right from starting? So one is the ocean rate discovery. So as I think it was pointed out during the conversation itself, the variability as well as the rate discovery. That's a big challenge for us. Then the space availability on the vessel. The vessel cutoffs are also an issue. We don't have a visibility. Even if we do a backward planning, generally we still face sometimes issues where we miss the vessel. Then port congestion, DPD issues. So there is a lot of port congestion, especially JNPT, which is our where the maximum import takes place. There's a lot of imbalance in terms of where the shipments are coming. So even though I have seen players in NCR, the large manufacturing companies, the auto companies, they still prefer JNPT over Mundra and Kandla, where they have a direct road connectivity right to NCR. The reason being is one, the most of the shipping lines nominate first at JNPT and then coming to Mundra. So that's something which is, I would say, concerned with the international shipping lanes and the shipping companies, which the government has to, I would say, interact and try to ask the shipping lines to board directly at the ports which are more near to Gujarat and like Mundra as well as Kandla, Hazira. So that's where the congestion can drop. I think that's something which is there. But as part of NLP, as I think Krishna also asked, is the liner part is not there in the policy. The government envisages focuses more on the infrastructure within India, but how to set up, how to bring international liners, attract them to start maybe from India or nominate more at Indian ports. That's something which is not part of the policy, which I also see as missing, which has to be taken care of. The second thing, if we consider like now from the port, if we go to the ICD, there are different set of issues which we face. One is the ICD operators and port have different ownership. Now that's the coordination, the cost of coordination comes in over here, because though there are some operators who have now ventured from port to ICDs, like for example, Adani had done from Mundra to now ICD partly in north. So there are some, but still there is a lot of difference in ownership between the ports and the ICD, where the major ports are owned by the government. So this creates, I would say, a lead time issues, and that's for the handing over of the documents, etc. Then train operations are a lot inefficient and unreliable in India. Even if we have a fixed schedules, but if you ask ICD operators, that's where the major problem comes in, because ultimately, as we understand, the freight operations on train are deprioritized as compared to passengers. So that's one thing which is a big issue over here. And then there are clearance issues again at ICD ports. So there are different clearance mechanisms over there. Like for example, there can be a random custom checking which happens over there, which can again delay the shipment. So these are the problems which we face today. And then from the ICD to the plant, if I see, then the ICD infrastructure is a problem. So there are few ICDs who have that kind of setup, which, for example, which can manage end-to-end container movement right from unloading from the train, then again to the trailer in one go. There's still a lot of inter ICD movement happening, which takes a lot of time as well as charges. So the ICD handling charges you will find are in fact higher than the port handling charges most of the time, which we see. Then the road infrastructure is again a big challenge when you go to an ICD and then you see a connectivity from ICD to plant. There's a big challenge. The reason being is the roads are not designed, I would say, to capture that type of load which comes on when we carry containers. And then again, for approvals for factory destuffing, this is the biggest challenge which we see. Like there are a lot of documentations required for factory destuffing. If that happens, then again, the seamless movement of containers can happen. So these are challenges in terms of exports, I would say imports, which can be replicated to exports as well, which is being faced in the present state. And I think Saikat also mentioned most of them as well as Suresh. Now, what the logistics policy for envisages to address them is one, they have set up an e-logs, which is a common platform to connect freight forwarders with exporters, importers. Now, though the India as a government does not have a lot of power on the liners, because liners, the big five liners, they kind of the US and China, most of them control those liners. But the freight forwarders is what the first step that the government is doing to connect all the freight forwarders as well as the customers on a common platform, Now, the common platform might ensure in getting a right price discovery, which we said. And this, once the price discovery is clear, the variability component and all can be taken care of. The hedging can be done better. So this is what is, I think, a very good initiative for future, but still it will require some time to mature where both the customers as well as freight forwarders come and they start trusting this platform and they're getting orders from this platform. That's one thing. Then under the PM Gati Shakti plan is for interconnected operations. Now this is a special focus where a cross-functional team of different ministries is there to solve this problem from port to ICD to finally the truck movement. Now this is where they're trying to set up that infrastructure in ports as well as the ICDs where the seamless handling of goods can happen. The infrastructure component would be taken care of under the PM Gati Shakti plan. Now, the third thing which they are doing is under the Common Logistics Action Plan is the ease DPD approvals. Now, you'll see from past, if you see, I think 3 years, 4 years back, the DPD approvals were difficult. Now it's comparatively easy. The timeline is less if you want to have a direct port delivery. So this is there. They have started faceless customs approval. Now this is a way to start standardizing the custom clearance. But initially, I think most of the practitioners must have seen there are a lot of glitches in faceless custom approvals, a lot of containers being held. But slowly it is getting streamlined and a step in the right direction. Then the focus is on reducing the port turnaround time. So these actions all lead to the reduction in the port turnaround time, and they're also monitoring it and they report it like the port turnaround time from India, for example, for JNPT was X in this month and now reduced to this month. So the KPI monitoring has started at the government level. Then there's a unified logistics plan, which is a common interface for approvals and synergetic planning. So, for example, there are different ministries involved. Like there's a customs, there's the customs department involved. There's a shipping ministry which is involved over here. So there are different ministries involved for which they want to set up a common interface for approvals. Now, this infrastructure, digital infrastructure, is under setup. As I gave an example, for example, that certificate of origin, etc., which was manual earlier, now it has started to move to an online system where now you need not go to go to the officer for signing that or signing that document. So all these small steps save us time as well as I would say the cost, which are the hidden costs which we talked about. And then they're planning on running trains which are double stack. I think one is already started from Mundra to the north, but still the load imbalance is there. But slowly this is all going to lead us to a lower rate per ton per kilometer, which will in fact lead to cost savings. And then privatization of ICDs is what the government is being doing. For example, Concor, if you will see, they have privatized a lot of ICDs, which Concor initially used to own to improve the operations as well. But still, personally, I feel this policy still needs to be looked up because there are not too many ICDs in a particular region which has now started to come up and there is not enough load consolidation happening. For example, if I talk about NCR, there are 7 to 8 ICDs with a span, I would say, of 200 kilometers, for which the consolidation of load is not happening. So these are the steps which the government is planning to do to solve this import related, I would say, the infrastructure. Now, I'll now come to the outbound part, which is more related to the domestic road transport and how does NLP tries to address that. Now, first of all, I think Suresh already mentioned the warehousing issue. Warehousing is a big issue. Now, organizations, if you'll see, mostly today prefer their own warehouses. Now, if they go for an own warehouse, one is the difficulty comes to manage inventory across channels. Secondly, they could not go for very highly sophisticated infrastructure. They'll have small land parcels, the rent would be higher, and then the infrastructure would also not be highly automated. The second issue is the truck standardization and low utilization. So the trucks in India, if I were to ask what is the length, breadth, height of a truck, that's a big issue for us. We cannot plan how much load each truck can take. So that is why the utilization levels for India has is comparatively low when we see the primary transport utilization. For example, if I see even a geography like South Africa, they'll run at around 95, 96%, and the secondary at around 80, 82%. But in India, if you see primary average is around 85, 86%, and secondary is around 60, 65%. So that's the major concern which we have. The logistics policy tries to address them in two ways. One, it tries to give a warehousing standard. So if you see the logistics policy, it has developed a very detailed book for warehousing standards for each and every different type of technologies which warehouses can implement. It also lists all the automation possibilities. It brings in packaging standards as well as vehicle standards. So it has envisaged all the truck types, what shall be the length, breadth, height of that truck type, uh, of that setup, and then the automobile companies now have to come in to maintain that length, breadth, height, so that the vehicle standardization can happen, and therefore then we can improve the utilization part. The third is co-warehousing and scale and automation. Now what happens is, once you start going to a multi-channel level, for example, you are serving from a same warehouse, suppose e-com as well as B2B, the setup is going to be entirely different, right? And then when you go for a co-warehousing space with a standard packaging or standard palletized movement, for example, then what happens is unlocks is you can enable cross channel, I would say an omni-channel setup. From the same warehouse, you can serve both the different types of channels. It would be a large warehouse and automated setup. So this type of co-warehousing is going to unlock huge potential. But again, the standardization is the first key thing which has to move into that. But companies have to start looking for these operations, because the costs of shared spaces as well as even the part truckloads have started to come down in India. The part truckload, for example, if I say, which earlier used to move in suppose 24-foot truck, now I don't see any large PTL player moving trucks less than 32 feet. They are having that volumes now, and therefore the cost is becoming competitive. Then the omni-channel services is something which can enable with co-warehousing, where you have a large warehouse setup, and then you serve different customers, even B2B and B2C from that same warehouse. The last part I'll quickly cover is on the last mile. Now, last mile, the key issues which we face is the high secondary cost and low vehicle utilization, which I said. Visibility is a big issue, and then the D2C channel capability is another big issue. Now, if you do not have a standardized setup or an integrated setup of warehouse and transport, visibility is a big challenge. If you do not have a dedicated truck, it's very hard to find where the truck is going, how to track it. And therefore, most of the companies which want, I would say, the right visibility, they even end up having a nominated truck, which leads to a lower asset utilization, higher costs. So these are all the issues which we face in secondary, which the policy envisages to address. Now, what will happen is, once we have a digitally enabled logistic setup, now the last mile consolidation possibility will happen. You go with a co-warehousing space, and then the final customer which we are serving, there is a lot of possibility of consolidation in the secondary setup. For example, this is where all the e-com companies, for example, the Flipkart recently, I think they moved away, they shelved their logistics arm into a separate company. And what even, for example, delivery is trying to do, they're trying to consolidate the secondary load, because ultimately the D2C set in a D2C setup, they are trying to reach the same customer, same locations with different companies load consolidated, the secondary cost comes down. Now, if you have a digitally enabled setup where you can send up your LR request, you don't need to phone call, all this is possible. And the policy envisages that to send up an end-to-end setup. So that's what the problems which can be solved. So these are the actions under NLP to achieve global standards, ultimately leading to reduction of TAT, improved service, reduction of inventory and transport cost, warehousing cost, and also enabling a D2C capability. So that's the long vision of NLP to reduce that cost from, again, like what I said, is 14% to 8%, but it's not going to happen in one go. What the companies have to take care of, they have to keep track of what all changes have been implemented, and then slowly be the first mover to get a competitive advantage in that. For example, anything becomes seamless, new platforms being launched, new infrastructure being launched by the government, the companies have to come up and try it out and see how and when it can turn out to be a win-win situation for both. So
Yeah.
that's on the policy part. Yeah, I'll take a pause now.
Hey, thanks,